It's just loading. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on the evaluation of the Career and College Promise Program. My name is Katie Bao. I'm a research specialist with the North Carolina Community College System Office. And with me today is Julie Edmonds, the Program Director for Secondary School Reform at the Serve Center at UNC Greensboro. So if any of you are not familiar with the Career and College Promise Program, there's legislation here in North Carolina that allows students to take college courses while they are in high school, all these dual enrollment or dual credit or concurrent enrollment courses. And in North Carolina, we have three main pathways for CCP. We have our cooperative innovative high schools. These include our early colleges, middle colleges, and other innovative high schools such as career academies. We also have, for the more traditional high school students, two options. They can either take college transfer pathway, which are courses that are meant to either lead to an associate degree or to meet a lot of the gen ed requirements for a four-year degree. Or students can take the CTE pathway, which is career and technical education courses, which are designed to either lead to a credential or to provide for a workforce-based major. So we are both part of this project called the Evaluation of CCP. This is a 5-year federally funded study. And we have several partners involved in this project. So the North Carolina Community College System is a partner, the Serve Center is a partner, but also the Department of Public Instruction, our K-12 system, is a partner, and the RAND Corporation. So the main goals of this study are to look at the impact of CCP. So what are the outcomes for our CCP students? Are they benefiting over and above other non-dually enrolled students? We're looking at the implementation of the program. So how is it actually implemented on campuses? And also the cost of the program. So we're currently about to start a cost study looking at the cost of the programs from the perspective of the students, the schools, et cetera. And a large part of this project also is to develop the partners' capacity to work with researchers and to work with data to try to continue the improvement of CCP beyond just this 5-year grant. So both the community college system and the Department of Public Instruction, we've been engaging in different capacity building activities. So one example are the dashboards. I've created a number of dual enrollment dashboards. And you can see the link there to those dashboards. I'll be presenting on those in a little bit. And then also we have a conference, a dual enrollment conference that will be taking place September 23rd and 24th. This will be fully virtual. And if you have not yet registered for it, you can click that link right there. And then we've also, each of the individual agencies have engaged in some different capacity building exercises and training. So for example, at the community colleges, we did some cost study training. So now I'm going to turn things over to Julie to talk about some of the research coming out of this project.
Sure. Thank you, Katie. So today we're going to talk about two main questions, and we're going to talk about college level factors that are associated with different levels of CCP participation. And then we also have some preliminary findings around the impacts of the 3 different CCP pathways. So first, we know that there's differing levels of participation, and that participation in CCP differs by the high school in which students are located, the district, and then also the college. And so since you all are a community college audience, today we're going to spend some time talking about the college level factors that are associated with different levels of CCP participation. So what we did is we looked at the percentage of 12th graders that were taking college transfer and CTE pathways within a community college's service area. And we allowed students who are located in districts that are within multiple colleges' service areas to count towards each of those colleges. So you could say some students are being double counted here. We looked at several different college level measures and tried to understand the association between those different measures and the participation levels of students. So we looked at the size of the college measured by the FTE. We looked at the percentage of the FTE that was workforce focused within a college. So that includes curriculum CTE students and students that are taking courses in several continuing education categories. We looked at the percentage of curriculum students who are non-white, the percent of curriculum students who are eligible to receive a Pell Grant, and then we also looked at the location of the college by county economic tier. And these are the North Carolina Department of Commerce tiers, and that was based on the main campus location. So before we do this and before we present the findings, I want everyone to take a quick quiz. So if you have a little piece of paper, you can jot down what you think the answers to these questions are. So, for example, do you think smaller colleges or larger colleges will have more 12th graders participating in CCP in their service area? Do you think students or colleges with more students taking workforce courses or colleges with fewer students taking workforce courses will have higher participation in their service area? Question 3 is about colleges with higher percentages of minority students or colleges with lower percentages of minority students. Which one will have higher levels of participation in their service area? And then for A, if you believe that colleges with more Pell eligible students will have higher participation, pick 4A. And if you think that colleges with fewer Pell eligible students will have higher participation, then pick 4B. And then the last one is, do you think colleges in more economically distressed counties will have higher participation or colleges in less economically distressed counties? I'm going to give a second for people to jot down their answers. If anyone wants to put them in the chat, they certainly can. Katie is I don't know if our presentation is online yet. If our presentation is online, then please do not cheat and look at the answers in advance.
Online, yes.
It is online, so don't cheat.
But if you'd like to download this afterwards, you can do so.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's look at the first one. So the first one, and each of these graphs follow a similar pattern. So I'm just going to take a minute to explain this and make sure that people understand what they're looking at here. So this number up here, these numbers is 36.5, 31.6, 30.1, 20.5. This is the percentage of 12th graders in the service area who are enrolled in CCP. I do want to be very clear. This is not the percentage of students in the college that are dually enrolled. This is the percentage of 12th graders in the service area who are enrolled in dual enrollment courses. And then what we did was we took the colleges and divided them into quartiles. And so this blue one, these are the smallest colleges. So these are colleges that have enrollments of less than 826 students. The orange here on the right is the largest set of colleges, and those are colleges that have enrollment of over 1990 students. So as we can see, there's kind of a real pattern here, a stair-stepping pattern, where the smaller the college, the higher the participation rate is. The larger the college, the smaller the participation rate in the service. And then again, this is in the service area. It's not within the college itself. So if you're taking a quiz here, the correct answer for this one is 1A. All right, so the next one is by the percentage of workforce-focused students. So again, we have these quartiles. Just as a reminder, this is the percentage, these numbers here, this 19.1 and the 29.5. These numbers here are the percentage of 12th graders in the service area that are enrolled. The quartiles here are about the participation of the college's FTE and workforce. So essentially what we see is the more workforce-focused colleges, so that's the quartile 4, they have more enrollment in their service area. More 12th graders in their service area are taking dual enrollment courses. So there's higher CCP participation in service areas of colleges with higher shares of workforce-focused students. So the correct answer for that one is 2A. All right, the next one we're going to look at is the percentage of minority students. It's percentage of non-white students in the area. And as you can see, the participation tends to be higher in service areas of colleges with the lowest percentage of non-white students. But this is not really kind of a trend that follows. So there's jumps up and down here. So it's not really consistent as the percentage of non-white students increases. And for example, quartile 2, so colleges with 27 to 40% non-white, and students in colleges that are close to half non-white and more, they have approximately the same levels of enrollment in their service area. So the correct answer for this one is 3B, sort of. Technically, the participation rate is higher in colleges with lower percentages of non-white students, but again, that's not necessarily a consistent trend. We see something similar with Pell eligible. So the institutions that have the lowest number of Pell eligible students, that's that first quartile there, less than 28% Pell eligible, also have the highest percentage of students, again, 12th graders enrolled in dual enrollment courses in their service area. However, that pattern is not consistent at all. And in fact, the next highest amount is among those colleges that have the most numbers of Pell eligible students. So the correct answer on this one is 4B, but not sort of really, because again, that pattern is not consistent. And then when we look at the county economic tiers, what we see is that colleges who are located in Tier 1 and Tier 2, so those are your more economically distressed counties, those are the ones that have higher levels of participation, of CCP participation in their service area. So the correct answer for that one is 5A. So I'm going to pause here and give people a chance to put any questions in the chat or any comments, any findings surprising from this, any implications for any of these findings in terms of what it might mean for you or for the colleges with which you work. And I'm going to defer to Katie to keep an eye on the chat.
Please put any comments you have or any questions in the chat. Then we will answer them. So we've got a couple comments saying that people are getting most of them right. So perhaps not too surprising for most people.
It sounds like that's their experience bears this out. Yeah, if anybody has any thoughts about the implications, because we are trying to think this through. It's like, so it's maybe interesting, but it's like, so what? Like, what can people do and what can the system do with this kind of information? So if people have thoughts about that, that would be wonderful to include in the chat.
We do have a question. Why do larger colleges have smaller CCP participation?
So just as a reminder, that's the smaller CCP participation in the surrounding area. It's not necessarily the percentage of students enrolled in the college that are CCP participants. Actually, I think that a lot of what's going on here is that we have a lot higher CCP CCP participation in rural areas. And that tends to be also where your smaller colleges are located. And I think part of that is because those rural areas may not have as many other options for advanced course taking as some of the more urban areas that have more options, for example, AP or IB courses that students can take. And so I think for some of your smaller, again, more rural settings, CCP is the primary way that students get advanced courses. And so that's, I think this is our working theory in terms of why we might be seeing some of these patterns. Katie, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. That, if students only have one option for taking college level courses, they're going to be more likely to take dual enrollment. Whereas if they have multiple options, then we'll see students taking both or choosing one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
None so far.
Okay. All right. Feel free to interrupt. So let's move on to the impacts of CCP. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time here talking about the methods. So we have kind of two sort of study approaches that are being used as part of this project. So our main approach for looking at the college transfer and the CTE pathway, and again, these are the pathways that occur in comprehensive high schools, as Katie described, is a quasi-experimental approach where we're comparing pathway participants with non-pathway participants. And both groups in this case may have taken AP courses, but we're not including CIHS students in either one of these groups at this point. We have a really large sample, so we're basically using the entire state, and we're looking at the time period from 2012-13 through 2018-19. And so that gives us about 500,000 11th and 12th graders. So that's a really big sample. If you know anything about statistics, that means that most of the analyses that you will see will be statistically significant because our sample is so big. But we also know that CCP participants and non-CCP participants aren't necessarily going to look the same. And so we're using a statistical approach called weighting that basically makes these populations look the same on things like background characteristics and on achievement and other sort of factors there, so that the populations sort of look similar to each other. We do have a big limitation with our study right now, and currently we only have post-secondary enrollment data from public institutions in North Carolina, so from the UNC and from the North Carolina community college systems. And as a result, we don't have good data currently on our full sample about enrollment in private institutions or if students go out of state. So people need to keep that in mind when you see the results. Then the second sort of study is, in this we're looking at early colleges, and we're looking at a subset of the CIHS schools. This is part of a longitudinal 17-year experimental study that we first began in 2006. And we've been, and it's been funded by the federal government ever since then. And this one uses a slightly different design. Participating schools basically used a lottery to select their students, and we compare students who applied and were randomly selected through the lottery with those students who applied and were randomly not selected through the lottery. This is an experimental design as opposed to a quasi-experimental, and it really means that we are comparing apples to apples, and that the students that we are looking at were all similarly motivated, had similar background characteristics. The difference is only whether they went to the early college setting or not. Our sample with this one is much smaller, obviously, so we have about 4,000 students in 19 early colleges. And again, our population started in 05-06, and then we had 6 cohorts of students. So the last cohort, enrolled in 9th grade in the 10-11 year. And basically that last group of students is essentially finishing college at this point. So they are 6 years after 12th grade. So we've been following these students through high school and into post-secondary education. And so we have results for them for attaining post-secondary credentials. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the impact in the college transfer pathway. Again, I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining this chart to you because you're going to see 3 different charts that follow the same format. So our outcomes are listed on the left here. So we looked at 4-year graduation rate, enrollment in any North Carolina public post-secondary institution, enrollment in a UNC system school, and then enrollment in a North Carolina community system school. You see the CCP participants mean, so those are the students who are enrolled in CCP. The non-CCP participants, and remember this mean is weighted, so we tried to make these students look similar to the participants. And then the difference between those two is our impact estimate. Those little stars mean statistical significance, and that basically means that it was unlikely that the results just happened by chance, right? Again, our samples are so large that even impacts that are pretty small are considered statistically significant. So if we look at this, what we see is that the CCP participants in the college transfer pathway had higher high school graduation rates. So I should be clear, these are high school graduation rates. Should have put that in the slide there. And so there's a slightly higher rate, 99.5%. These are really high graduation rates in general. As a reminder, we started identifying these students in 11th grade. And so any students that dropped out in 9th or 10th grade wouldn't be included in our sample. And then what we see is that there's also a good size positive impact on enrollment in any North Carolina public institution, 9.6 percentage point impact there. We see that there's a positive impact on enrollment in the UNC system school within 1 year of graduating from high school, and that there's enrollment and a larger enrollment in North Carolina community colleges within 1 year. So positive impacts on all of those are statistically significant. We also look at impact of participation in the CTE pathway. And this only means basically that the students only were enrolled in the CTE pathway. We do have some students who are enrolled in both the college transfer and the CTE pathway, and we're just not presenting those results to you today. So as you can see, the 4-year high school graduation rate for this particular population, it's slightly lower than the one for the college transfer, but the impact here is larger. So there's a larger positive impact on high school graduation rates of CCP participation. Also, a large impact of enrollment in any North Carolina public post-secondary institution. There's a small negative impact on enrollment in the UNC system, but you don't see any stars there, and that means it's not statistically significant, which means that there's really no difference in enrollment between these two populations. So basically, there's no impact on enrollment in the UNC system from participation in the CTE pathway. However, there is a large positive impact on enrollment in North Carolina community colleges within 1 year as a result of participation in the CTE pathway. And again, if you're having any questions about any of these, feel free to put something in the chat. And Katie, feel free to interrupt if there are any questions, clarifying questions about any of these slides. Now we're moving to the other study. So reminder, early college study. This is the one where schools used a lottery. We're following the kids who got in through the lottery and the kids who didn't get in through the lottery. Again, because this study started earlier, we have students are much further out. In this case, we're looking at attainment of a post-secondary credential. We define that in several different ways. So we've got attainment of any post-secondary credential, and then we break it out by associate degrees and bachelor's degrees. And then we look at it at 2 different time points. So one time point is 4 years after 12th grade, and the other time point is 6 years after 12th grade. 6 years is generally considered on-time graduation for, even though it's not really, but on-time graduation for 4-year institutions. So what we see, if you look there, we've got the large, and again, we've got the stars there. Our sample isn't as large, so the stars are not necessarily a function of the large sample size. But we see a large positive impact on attainment of any post-secondary credential in both 4 years out and 6 years out, although the impact is a little bit smaller 6 years out. We see that that's driven in large part by large positive impacts on attainment of associate degrees, which makes sense because most of the students in the early colleges are enrolled in community colleges, and many of them have the opportunity to earn their degree at the same time that they are graduating from high school. But we also see that earning this associate degree is not coming at the expense of the 4-year institution, so there's actually a positive impact on 4-year degree attainment. When we look at 6-year degree attainment, we see that actually, interestingly, the impact on 2-year on community college degrees has increased, but the impact on 4-year degrees has decreased, and we see our control group starting to catch up a little bit. What this does suggest is that the students in the early college group do receive their degree more quickly, and they actually save about 6 months in a bachelor's degree and about 2 years on their associate degrees. We also have some new data, and these are some outcomes from the UNC system. So we looked at students who enrolled, early college students who enrolled in the UNC system school after leaving the CIHS. There's a few early colleges that are affiliated with UNC system schools. We did not count their high school data in these analyses. So what we see is that early college students had more credits that could be considered advanced, in this case, the 300 plus levels, compared to, so 38% of early college students' credits were advanced compared to 26% of the control students' credits. Both groups had the same GPA, so we saw that there was no real impact on GPA. So college performance is about the same, even though the early college students are doing things more quickly and don't have as much time in high school. Early college students were less likely to switch majors. So 30% of the early college students switched their major at least once, compared to 37% of the control group. That suggests that early college students were more focused when they entered the 4-year institution. They also left college with less in loans. And so we see they had about $2,900 less in loans for all students, including those who might not have graduated. For those who graduated, it's about $3,800 less in loans for the early college students. And then for all 3 pathways, we did look at the impacts on subgroups. So we're particularly interested in impacts on economically disadvantaged students, on impacts on students who are members of underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. So that includes students who are Black or African American, students who are Hispanic or Latinx, and students who are Native Americans. So those populations we're particularly interested. For all of our studies, so in looking at all 3 pathways, the college transfer, the CTE, and the early college pathway, we saw that economically disadvantaged students actually benefited the most. They benefited more than non-economically disadvantaged students. Both economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged students, both of them benefited, but the impact was higher for our economically disadvantaged students. And actually, that is the one population that has a positive impact for the early colleges on 4-year degree attainment 6 years after graduation, 6 years after 12th grade. So what that suggests is that gaps between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged students might be narrowing. When we look at the CTE and the college transfer pathway, we saw a larger impact on post-secondary enrollment for students who were underrepresented minority students. And that impact was larger than for students who are not underrepresented minority. So that suggests that that might contribute some to a narrowing of gap in post-secondary enrollment. In the early college study, there were both underrepresented minority, non-underrepresented minority students benefited from the program, but one group didn't seem to benefit more than the other. So both of them had the same impacts. So that's just some highlights from some of our findings. We have a lot more data and a lot more results, but we're going to pause here and give people an opportunity to ask questions or make any points that they'd like to make. And it looks like we've got about 15 minutes, so we've got some good time for discussion if anybody would like to have that. And I know we don't have a great setup for discussion because you have to ask questions in the chat, but feel free to jump in if you'd like to say something. And Katie will be monitoring that.
So while we're waiting for you to add your questions, we have a few that came in a little earlier.
Great.
So Christy's asking, does CCP pathway choice, transfer versus CTE, correspond to the percentage of CTE courses offered at the college? So in other words, are CCP students at colleges with more CTE programs enrolled in those CTE programs?
That is a great question, and we have not looked at that, but let me write that down as something to look at. So the question is the relationship between CTE pathway participation and workforce focused, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
Another question from Rebecca, will you be conducting any qualitative analyses in those rural areas?
So yes, so we've already done some site visits around, before the pandemic. We did some visits to schools to try to understand reasons that students participated in the different pathways, and particularly focusing on college transfer and CTE pathways, because we've already done a lot of data collection around CIHS and early colleges. And so we've done some data collection around that. We're in the process of planning our site visits for this upcoming year that are going to look at different issues of implementation. And so trying to understand what the programs actually look like, and then also starting to collect some data on costs, as Katie mentioned. We have a whole host of questions that we're trying to answer, but if people have insight about things that we should pay particular attention to when we go out and do the qualitative visits, feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll make sure that we're considering those.
And Jody's asking about the governor's new program. So all high school students who graduated with a high school diploma this spring will be allowed to get college for free. Do you think that the number of high school students coming to the community colleges will increase?
If that ends up in place, I would absolutely expect so. And I think in general, you are seeing the number of high school students enrolling in community colleges is increasing, I think, just as part of a dual enrollment. I mean, I think people are seeing this as a more viable pathway too, and it's certainly a lot cheaper if you can get your first 2 years of college at a community college and then go on to a four-year institution for the last 2 years. So I know overall enrollment in community colleges is facing challenges, but actually, and Katie, can you speak to that? Are you seeing sort of increases among, even if overall enrollment is declining, are you seeing increases among students immediately coming from high school?
I'm not sure about that. We are seeing dual enrollment start to level off, but I'm not sure about students after they graduate.
Yeah. And I will say the pandemic obviously threw everybody for a loop, right? And so I think any trends that you see in the past year all should have a big old asterisk next to them in terms of, not necessarily being predictive of what future trends might be.
Let's see, Kathy's asking, is there comparison data for early college programs in other states?
So early college and specifically, so there's a national study that was done, and we actually contributed some data to that. They looked at 10 schools, 4 of which were in North Carolina, but 6 of which were elsewhere, using the same methods that we used, except it was retrospective. And they found similar, almost identical findings to ours in terms of higher enrollment in post-secondary education, higher degree attainment, and then they don't have access to the same level of sort of data about post-secondary performance that we have, but there's been a lot of real similarities there. The other, let's see, I know I just did a summary of this, of early colleges. Otherwise, there's a couple of small little studies that have been done, but in terms of large-scale studies, ours is one, and then one conducted by AIR is another. So if you actually just Google American Institutes of Research Early College Impact Study, you'll find the national results. Again, it's actually a smaller sample than ours, but they are spread out across multiple states.
Okay, Tonya is asking for anyone, including listeners, how have you increased CCP participation in minority groups? Most of our participants are white and female. And I'll let anyone who wants to answer that, but I do want to point out in our dashboards, you can see if you're not sure what your participation rates are for your college, we have that by college, and I'll be talking a little bit about that in the next session when I'll be talking about the dashboards. And we see that across the system, that the majority of our participants are white females.
Yeah, so that is pretty standard, is that the data, people looking at dual enrollment across the country see that pattern generally, that more dual enrollment students are white, more are female also, and then in general they tend to be sort of more academically advantaged as well. The one setting where that is not the case is the early college setting, and partly because early colleges are very intentional about doing some outreach about that. And I'm happy, actually, I should put this in the chat. Well, we don't have it posted yet. I'll send it around to Katie. But we just wrote a write-up of a project that was in Columbus, Ohio. And so it was done by Columbus State Community College. And their goal was to expand access to underrepresented students in particular. And they were successful at expanding access to economically disadvantaged students and underrepresented minority students. And so in that brief, we include the findings from that. And then we also include some strategies that people used. I mean, essentially, it is that you have to be really intentional and purposeful, right? You have to be doing specific outreach. You have to, one school was actually using data. So these were things that high schools were doing too. One school was using data that suggested that students might have positive outcomes, and was doing specific outreach to those students and saying, hey, look, you could be taking these courses, why aren't you, kind of thing. And so it's really around being very purposeful and intentional about who you're trying to reach out to, and making sure that students of color and economically disadvantaged students can see themselves taking those courses. Did anybody have any other comments to add about that?
No, just that other people are seeing the same things for their service areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, basically, if you're not intentional about it and you just kind of throw it out there and let whoever enrolls, well, who's going to enroll first? Or they're going to be people that are coming with the socioeconomic advantages that allow them to take advantage of these things, right? I mean, those are the people that are going to take first advantage of it. So again, it really has to be more of that intentional and purposeful outreach. And then also recognizing that there need to be sort of corresponding efforts around getting more students ready. Because, if you really want to expand access, you need to make sure that more students are prepared to be successful in those courses. And then there's also a piece about really supporting students, because Again, if you're expanding access to students, and some of these students may not have the home environments that allow them to, that help them understand how to navigate a dual enrollment course and manage their time effectively and all that sort of stuff. Those populations of students need extra help in doing that. And so building and making sure that those supports are in place as well. So those are some strategies. And Katie, I'll try to, actually I can give you a copy of that, Katie, if you want to post it maybe along with this session.
Yeah,
and
I could do that.
People can download that. Hopefully it'll be useful. That's our intent.
Okay, we have one more question. Is there research being done on employment outcomes of CCP students versus non-CCP students?
Great question. So that we are funded to do that. And so we're in the process of trying to get access to those data. So using commerce data, we are also funded to do, a different funder has funded us to continue the early college study and do some linkages to workforce data. And so we're in the process of trying to make those linkages happen. I would say anytime you try to link to things that involve social security numbers and things like, there's all kinds of complications that come into play. So just actually doing the linking can be challenging. But yes, our intent is to look at those things. So stay tuned. And as soon as we have something to share about that, we will.
That's all the questions I'm seeing so far. If you have any more, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Yeah, so here's our contact information. If you have any questions about the project, Katie obviously is a great resource, and her the dashboards that she's created are amazing. So if you have not been able to access those yet, please do. I think they're very informative. And then if you have any questions about sort of the project, other findings, if you have questions about our early college study, we have a ton of resources that are available around that. Just feel free to reach out to me or to Katie, either one of us.
Thank you all for joining us today. Again, you can download these slides. You can get our emails or any of the links that we've shared through that download, and we'll also be posting that additional research that Julie mentioned. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.